Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. Today's webinar is about using mass notification to maintain facility safety during a pandemic. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the editor-in-chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by Singlewire Software. Before we get started, I would like to cover just a few housekeeping items. Please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions in the question box in that panel. Please send your questions in at any time, and they will be addressed after the presentation. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel. Clicking on that will either expand or collapse the control panel, so please be sure it is expanded so you can access that question box. Also, if at any time you experience a technical difficulty or have another type of question, you can send a message to us there, and someone on our team will answer you privately. If you're interested in continuing education credits, please note you'll receive a certificate of attendance in an email from Facility Executive after this webinar, and you can report that to your association. Now I'd like to introduce your speakers, Pat Shekel and Christopher Puryear. Pat Shekel is with Singlewire Software, and he's Executive Vice President of Product Management and Marketing there. Having joined the company in 2010, he's currently responsible for the product direction of Singlewire's InformaCast emergency mass notification system. And Pat has more than 20 years of experience in the IT industry, including 2 decades with unified communications and collaboration. Christopher Puryear is Collaboration Solutions Architect at Netsync, and he has a strong record of success in unified communications, which includes voice, video, contact center, WebEx, Spark, telepresence, video streaming, and digital media signage. Chris has over 15 years of experience designing, installing, and aiding clients in planning for the future growth of unified communications applications. His background enables him to excel in the integration of various technologies from varying manufacturers to provide the best possible solutions to clients. So now we'll hear from Pat first, and we look forward to a great presentation and your questions at the end. Thanks so much. Hi, Pat.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so we got introductions out of the way, but this helps you get an idea of I guess, what we look like as we're delivering this on audio today. So what we plan on covering is talking about why someone would want to implement a mass notification ecosystem, really how these things fit together. We're going to talk about various use cases and some design considerations of when you would think about using different devices to reach people and that sort of thing. And of course, we're going to have a panelist interview with Chris from Netsync, where we're going to talk about what they're seeing with their customers. So just by way of background, Netsync is an integrator and is a reseller of Singlewire's InformaCast solution. And they've really bundled services around InformaCast, services and product around that to really come together with a complete solution, what they call their Olympus solution. So we'll have a little bit of slideware on Singlewire, a little bit of slideware on Netsync, and then we'll really talk to Chris about what he's seeing in the marketplace and what is top of mind for the organizations that we're working with these days when it comes to safety and security. So first, by way of background, who is Singlewire? So we're based in Madison, Wisconsin. We have about 115 people on staff. We're the makers of InformaCast, and there are a few different service levels of InformaCast. We start out with, like all software companies, making on-premises software. We have since developed a cloud version, and our flagship offering is called InformaCast Fusion, and it's a hybrid cloud architecture, allowing us to reach both on-premises and mobile devices. We've been at this quite a while, as you can see, so that's allowed us to amass a pretty substantial customer base of about 7,000 customers in more than 50 countries. When we look at what people are coming to us for in terms of use cases, we've seen a bit of a shift with the pandemic. Certainly we still see use cases like severe weather, little bit less of a concern about active shooter these days because we aren't congregating in public quite as much as we had been prior to COVID. So we see things like remote worker notifications and health advisories. We see our customers asking their staff if they're healthy and then getting message confirmations back, things like that. With that said, we do see various parts of the countries opening, and some industries, of course, never really closed. And so we do see the on-premises notifications as being something that are still really important. We see a lot of facilities integration, locking doors, tying into digital signage, tying into existing overhead paging systems, and so on. So again, of course, depends on where you're at, where you're located, and what industry you're in, but we do see a very mixed environment with people wanting to have a way to break through the noise in terms of getting in touch with the remote workers very quickly. For example, we have customers that are sending out notifications that someone at a facility tested positive for COVID, and you don't know when you're going to get notified of that. That could come in the middle of the night, come in the early morning. You want to get in touch with people before they come in for work, because they'll need to quarantine, they'll need to get tested, and so on. So we do see customers sending messages like that fairly regularly. And then we see messages about opening back up. We see messages going out about masking policies, face covering policies. We see messages going out about a deep clean being done and report to work tomorrow and things like that. So just trying to share a little bit of what we're seeing. This is what we call our any-to-any diagram, and really just illustrates what we can do with the software in terms of the ability to send from just about anything, represented there on the left in yellow, and the ability to send to just about anything on the right in green. And what really differentiates us in the market is that we go beyond the mobile phone. Most mass notification systems are looking at it in one of two ways, either from a facilities-based perspective where they're tied into your fire alarm system or your access control system, and they're really sending those things on premises, or they're looking at it from a mobile mass notification perspective, where really what they're focused on is getting in touch with people on the mobile phone, and more specifically, they are doing bulk SMS text messaging. And what we have done is we've tied together those two in a very seamless way in a single platform so that we're reaching people wherever they are. And the other thing that we're doing is breaking through with intrusive audio. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the ecosystem, and we'll talk about why an ecosystem is important. So Informacast has really become an industry standard, and what we help people do is get the most out of the things that they already have. So if you already have an existing overhead paging system, we're not going to tell you to take it out. We're going to integrate to it very simply. There are two technical methods of doing that. We can tie into it no matter what it is, and we can reuse it. We can give it new intelligence. So if you have a campus that has 30 buildings and they each have a different overhead paging system, we can send audio to all of those simultaneously. That's one example. If you look here, whether you have digital signage from different vendors in different buildings, we can send to that signage and interrupt it and put the emergency message on the television screen, on the monitor. And we can tie into different types of IoT devices. And this is really just a way of saying we can connect to the physical world. So it can mean things like line stop buttons, loading dock doors, eye wash stations, the plant lines stopping and wanting to notify people. So they're manufacturing examples. We have examples in healthcare with patients who are at wander risk, dementia patients specifically, and they're wearing an active RFID bracelet. And then we are sending audio to the threshold when they cross a threshold of a door that they're not supposed to go past, and telling them to turn around. So there's all sorts of things that we're doing when you look at how we tie into the physical environment and how we leverage what people already have. So sending broadcasts to their collaboration system, which is where Chris's background and mine as well, dealing with phone systems back in the day, which have now morphed into collaboration systems, and tying into whether it's Microsoft Teams or Cisco WebEx Teams and sending alerts through those, as well as sending audio broadcasts through the physical handsets that are sitting on people's desks. And those are systems that people have already made investments in, and we're just leveraging those existing communication pathways. So the reason that intrusive audio matters is we give the fire alarm example. If there were a fire in your building, you wouldn't just receive a text message and be expected to act on that. You, because of the fire codes that are adopted throughout the country, you will get a very loud alert. And now you'll likely get a visual alert with strobes. And in many places that have adopted the latest fire codes, you'll not only get an audio alert in terms of that annoying tone that we're all used to, but you may very well get spoken instructions telling you that there's a fire, proceed to the nearest exit, this is not a drill, that sort of thing. So you're going to get loud audio first and foremost. That's going to be your biggest clue. Yet if there's an active shooter or severe weather, many organizations check the box and say, I have an emergency notification system and I'm just going to send a text message, which sounds okay because we all have cell phones with us, except that there's a lot of research that's been done, and about 20% of your people won't receive that message. They're in a meeting and their phone is silenced, it's in a bag or briefcase, they're in an area that has poor cell coverage, there are people to which you owe a duty of care, but you don't even have their cell phone numbers, visitors, contractors, guests, etc. And so when you peel it away and you look at it, you're like, okay, well, just sending text messages isn't sufficient. We should be sending intrusive audio broadcasts for those types of events as well. And that's what we do, using a variety of existing devices that you have in your building environments. Your desk phones, your desktops or laptop computers, which have speakers on them, your existing overhead paging systems, and where none of those things are in play, let's say you have a hallway that's not covered by any of those things, or a break room, you can put in IP speakers. So let's talk a little bit about panic buttons. So we're not going to go through each of the categories in the ecosystem. We're just going to talk a little bit about the physical environment. And panic buttons have become increasingly popular as a way to trigger a notification. They come in a variety of form factors. As you can see here, physical panic buttons that I press, they're a box that has a button on them. Virtual panic buttons, such as a soft key or line appearance on a desk phone. And then mobile panic buttons, meaning I have an app on a smartphone, or I have a panic button that's mobile that is wireless, uses the wireless network inside of an organization, and might be on like a lanyard or a badge or something like that. We'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment when we talk to Chris. Talk about IP speakers, and so the distinction between IP speakers and existing overhead speakers, and the reason you might want to add IP speakers, again, you should never rip and replace an existing overhead paging system. That wouldn't be a really good ROI. But if you have areas that are not covered, if you have a new building going up, a greenfield development, that's a great place to put in IP speakers because you don't need a separate cabling plant. You can run them on Power over Ethernet. They are individually addressable, meaning each speaker could be its own zone, or I can mix and match however I like. And you have the ability to individually control the volume, which is a pretty big deal in a lot of environments. I don't have to mess with an entire zone speakers as I do with a typical 70-volt system. And the other thing is the displays. So these displays are all showing clocks, but when they do receive an emergency notification, that clock will go away and you will see scrolling text across there. They also often have integrated LED flashers. So when you think about what this means from an emergency notifications perspective, I can really grab people's attention with the visual component with a flashing LED strobe, and then I can have people look at it and they can read it, which works in a number of ways, but particularly in very loud environments. We see these being deployed in manufacturing and distribution environments where people are wearing hearing protection because the ambient noise is so loud anyway, that even if it was blasting, they probably wouldn't hear it because it'd be difficult to get above that noise, that background noise level. So having the visual component helps there too. All right, so that's just a little bit about Singlewire and about our flagship platform, Informacast Fusion, and what it can do. Now we're going to transition over to Netsync, and we're going to have Chris give us a little bit of background on Netsync. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Pat. I appreciate that. So Netsync is a partner with Singlewire. We've been in business since 2002. We are primarily a Cisco partner, holding multiple certifications. We're a Cisco Gold partner and a Master Collaboration partner, specializing in Cisco's collaboration portfolio. So as you can see on the slide here, we've 18 years in business. We are based in the state of Texas, out of Houston. We have multiple regional offices around the United States and 4 offices that are international. So we have a pretty good footprint of where we can service our customers or potential customers. We have multiple engineers in the field with all kinds of certifications in pretty much every area that Cisco specializes in, whether that be collaboration, security, wireless, route switch, any of those areas. We do have specialized teams and groups that specialize in those technology fields. So most of our business, we started out with a K through 12 focus, school districts and higher education. We are, within the past 5 years, have now grown more into commercial and enterprise. So we're about a 40-60 split, as the slide says now. So we have a good breadth of knowledge and experience in commercial enterprise as well as the education market. So one thing I want to point out here is we have developed a piece of software that really takes Singlewire to the next level, takes the InformaCast product to the next level. This product that we've developed in-house is called Olympus. And Olympus is a way to manage multiple devices for the notification aspect that Singlewire provides in a dashboard or single pane of glass format, right? So the way I like to describe it is, in the event of a notification that's been sent out, whether that be a weather alert, a gunshot detection, fire, smoke, you know, something like that, we have a single pane of glass that can bring up a building map. It can show you exactly where the alert was triggered, and then also trigger automated workflows based on that alert. So for example, if we have an active shooter situation, we can integrate with a gunshot detection system that can automatically, you know, lock or unlock doors, notify police, you know, send out notifications to on-site security if we do have on-site security. So things like that, just kind of an example of what this will do for us. It also is useful in tracking of employees. I know we don't have a lot of people that are on site anymore because of COVID, but when we do have people that are on site, we have the ability to track users via an ID badge, via their mobile devices that they may have in their pockets, and tell us, you know, if everybody is moving from one side of a building to another side of the building, then we know where to direct public safety and first responders. So this is just showing here another solution here. So in this example, he's using the mobile device. We can use that for weather notifications, group messaging. You can trigger alerts from the mobile device using the Singlewire application, and all of that can be done from anywhere, right? Whether you're on-prem, whether you're off-prem. We see this a lot in schools, for example. So we may have a teacher that's got students that are out in the field and they're doing something out there and they notice that something's happening or they need to trigger something. They may not be able to get inside fast enough. They can pull out their mobile device and then trigger an alert that way. So our Olympus platform basically follows a 4-step process, right? So step 1 is we receive an alert. That alert can be sent from a mobile device, a desk phone, any of our signaling devices. So that could be cameras, that could be, like I said, fire detection systems. Any of the inputs can trigger an alert or notification. Once we receive that notification, we then involve the Singlewire product. Any of the Cisco products are involved, so the routers, the switches, the phones. We can then trigger automated notifications, whether that be via text message, whether that be a overhead notification message that's played, whether that be an alert on an IP phone or a mobile device. We can trigger those things. And then pulling up our interface, we can then have visibility to track video surveillance cameras, employees, look at the sensors, look at the cameras. We can pull up all of that information. Once we have that information, then we can go into step 4, which would be an automated workflow. So what do we do with that information? Do we notify public safety responders? Do we automatically lock or unlock doors? Do we trigger strobe lights? All of these things are customizable based on the action.
So it's interesting what you've done with this, Chris. Mm-hmm. This, you know, building a solution that uses InformaCast at its core, but does a lot more in terms of the tracking and tying into other systems. It's really impressive what Netsync has done relative to Olympus. So I wanted to ask you, what do you see as being top of mind for your customers today? Obviously, things might have shifted a little bit with COVID and this year, but what are the most important 2 or 3 reasons that customers are reaching out to you?
So I think you've kind of hit it a little bit earlier in the presentation, but COVID notification is a very important thing right now, that they need to be able to alert employees when there's been a possible exposure at a location that they own, and also receive notification back that that employee has seen that alert, right? So they can track, if they send it to 100 people and only 80 people have seen it, they know who they need to go reach out to manually, right? Another big thing that we see a lot of times is weather events. So depending on the region of the country you're in or where you're located, what time of year it is, tornado warnings, right, are a huge thing. For example, I had a customer of mine who, they're a very large manufacturing organization. They work in the heating and air conditioning industry, and they have a very large building. And the only way they could mass notify the entire building, the multi-story building, that there was a weather alert is they actually had to physically go outside of the building and into their fire control room to send a notification through the fire control panel. And they came to us and said, it's not real safe that we're sending our employees outside in the middle of a tornado warning to send an alert. So how can we do this from inside in the safety of the building? And so we worked with them to implement a Singlewire solution and an Olympus solution to send out that mass notification in a weather event.
Yeah, that's really interesting and kind of a no-brainer, right? You don't want to be outside with a tornado. Yeah, whether you've seen Twister or not, you know that that's the case.
Yeah,
So,
when they told us they had to go outside, we kind of looked at each other like, oh, wow, we kind of need to reassess that. So.
Yeah, well, and I know you're in Houston, and we have people in Houston. They've told us that a lot of customers in that area you've had a lot of alerts being sent due to flash flooding over the past, say, 18 years. So.
Yes, absolutely. When we have hurricanes that come through, we obviously can integrate the National Weather Service with Singlewire. And so when the National Weather Service issues an alert for a specified area, we automatically receive that information and then can send out notifications to designated groups or designated areas based on those alerts from the National Weather Service. So that's a very powerful thing that customers are looking for as well.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about mass notification ecosystems, and in your case, you've really taken that, you've extended it, you have software at the core, of course, but then you have it tied into things that even we see on this diagram here, tying into digital signage and strobes and access control systems and video surveillance systems and so forth. So that's an example of a mass notification ecosystem. My question is, why wouldn't any organization want to do this? Why would they go to the steps to go beyond, say, just a mass notification system and to tie it into these other things?
So we see that a lot of times seconds count in the event of an emergency or a mass event, and you see that there is a lot of times a delay in the response times for employees when something happens. Especially if it's something major like, gunshot, let's say that, take that for example, people freeze up and they don't know what to do and they start to worry and they don't know where to go, what button to push and who to talk to and all of that. And by integrating an ecosystem that's automated, that runs, it's a technology, it does its thing, it knows what to do, you kind of take that human factor out, and it speeds up the alerting time and the response time for whatever those events may be, right? So, whether it be a gunshot, whether it be a tornado, you don't want to have the lack of a better term, the human factor in there that could cause a mistake or could delay a response, right? So by using the ecosystem and our ecosystem partners that we have, whether that be, a National Weather Service, whether that be cameras, whether that be detectors, smoke and fire detectors, it speeds up the alerting process and the response process. When you don't have to think about it and things just happen automatically, it makes it much easier and much safer for the employees that are active. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, sure does. It makes a lot of sense. You know, one of the integrations that we haven't talked about yet, but we see as being increasingly popular is tying into AED cabinets to defibrillator cabinets. And I mean, we at first glance you're like, oh, that's interesting. But then you think about it, like if there are two coworkers and one's having cardiac arrest, the other one's trying to help, it would be good to let whoever's responsible for safety know about that, right? So
Right.
more and more people doing that, and we have this actually in our demo room. We can show this over video. If anyone out there listening would like to see a demonstration, we can show this. You open the cabinet and the safety team is immediately notified. So many of those cabinets ship with a little light on top, and there's an alarm, but that's really only localized, right? So how do you let, you know, you're in a big distributed environment and your safety personnel aren't going to be watching every defibrillator cabinet around the clock. So how do you let them know that someone is in duress like that? And that's just one example of tying in to an existing system and making that trigger of the notification automatic, so that people don't have to think a lot during a time of high stress like an emergency.
Right. And so one thing I'd like to point out there is on that slide, you can see the ID badge there next to step 1 that has the stoplight buttons on it, the green, red, and yellow. Yeah. So that's a very good example of being able to track employees and their responses to an alert, right? So for example, in a school district, let's say the science lab, they've got a classroom full of kids and they're working on something and someone spills a bad chemical that could injure somebody. You know, they can hit on the teacher's ID badge, the emergency button or the need assistance button, and alert medical personnel or safety personnel that, hey, there's been a chemical spill and they're evacuating the room. Or if the situation's then taken care of without the assistance of, you know, the response team, they can mark themselves as good or safe with the green button, right? So you do have the ability with this technology to respond to events in real time based on whatever technology you have handy, whether that be your ID badge or phone. So there's that tracking aspect of being able to tell what is happening when and where and what the response to the alerts are.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're talking essentially about a mobile panic button in this case, and one that is worn around the neck on a lanyard. So what are you seeing in terms of other types of panic buttons? Are you seeing like the mounted buttons? We see mounted buttons that are big and red and flashy, so everybody knows about it. We see discrete under the table or under the desk type mounts. We see, as we mentioned, you know, on a line appearance or soft key on a desk phone, and then even desktop shortcuts. So have you seen any sort of trends in terms of more noticeable, less noticeable, mobile, not mobile? What are you seeing?
So my answer to that is yes. Because it depends on the environment, right? It depends on the organization and what their policies are, and it also depends on the industry that they're in, right? So for example, banking, you're not going to want a giant red button behind the teller's desk that says emergency, right? You're going to want a under the cabinet button or possibly a soft key on the phone, right, where the teller could just hit a button or sit something underneath the desk. If you're in a different environment, you know, whether that, let's say it's a school, right? They may have a button on the wall that's, you know, very visible, or they may have a lanyard that they use to mark themselves safe or mark an emergency that they can also use as their ID badge to get into the buildings, right? So it really does depend on the industry and the policies of that company, right? Every company has their own policies on what their safety and security plan is, and you know, how would they best benefit to trigger an alert or a notification and send that out without drawing attention to it, if that's the goal, or to draw all the attention that they possibly could to it, if that's the goal. So we see all kinds of different triggering methods, you know, whether that be from a lanyard or an IP phone or a regular phone, whether that be an under desk trigger or a panic button on the wall. It's so extensible and so customizable that it really depends on the organization and what their goals are.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you have, just as we have different messages for different use cases, you have different panic button triggering methods for different use cases.
Correct. And we even have, you know, we've got some customers that do automated triggers. So they may have IP cameras that are watching parts of the building, and they can, you know, set up a zone or an alert time that says, hey, we're closed after this time of day, if you see movement in this zone, send out an alert immediately, right? So, I mean, it's completely customizable just depending on what the goals of the organization are.
Sure. What about digital signage? Are you seeing that happen a lot? Are people connecting that to mass notification?
We are, absolutely. We are. You know, we have a good example of that, I could say, is a large corporate customer of mine. They have an on-campus cafeteria, and their cafeteria menu is a digital signage board, right? I think there's 3 or 4 of them that are in the cafeteria. Normally, those are just the menu that you can order food off of in the cafeteria. But in the event of an alert that gets sent out, we automatically take over those digital signage boards, and they're no longer the menu. They are now a customizable message, picture, alert, you know, scrolling marquee, however we want to customize that to let everybody that's in that area know that, hey, this is the event that's occurring, right? You know, if it's a tornado, go seek shelter. If it's gunfire, seek shelter. If it's fire, find the quickest exit out of the building, right? We do see that happening more and more as we're running into organizations that have digital signage, which is becoming more prevalent. When I first started doing this, hardly anybody had digital signage. Now it is growing and growing and growing. And so we can integrate with various digital signage manufacturers, just to, you know, depending on who it is, through different methods to take over that sign. So, you know, it may be a very, you know, generic board, like for example, at Netsync's office, when we have a customer that comes in, we have their name and their logo on the board right in the lobby. And, you know, it says, welcome to Netsync. Here's your customer name. Here's your logo. But in the event that we have something happens, we immediately take over that board, right? And then we can send out a notification on that board. So we do see customers doing that. And like I said, very customizable, very extensible. And, you know, it's up to the organization and what their policies are, but we do see that happening more and more. They are taking advantage of not only an audible alert, but the visual alert that, hey, suddenly the digital board in my office is now flashing red, something major is going on, and it grabs people's attention. If, for example, they're sitting at their desk and they have their headphones in, right? They may not hear the alert, but they can see a light flashing or they can see a board flashing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, it's interesting, we've seen digital signage evolve over the years, and it's gotten more sophisticated in some cases where the programming and the quality of the content that's being delivered is really interesting. We've also seen people using it for wayfinding solutions, so the board, depending on the location, can point people to the exit. And then the other thing that's been curious to me is that it's such a fragmented industry. There must be dozens of digital signage providers. We have published integrations to about a dozen of them, but we know that there are many dozen more because they pop up occasionally and with regularity. But what we've seen, in case there's folks out there thinking, well, I wonder if it can integrate with my digital signage system, or how would it do it? And the answer increasingly is CAP. So there seems to be a bit of a standardization on that notification or that integration method, and it's CAP, the Common Alerting Protocol. We have the ability to publish an external CAP feed, and the digital signage systems are then consuming that feed and then interrupting the existing content with the alert. There is the ability to do it via RSS as well. That's kind of the old school way of doing it, and it's just not as fast because with RSS it's a pull or a pull, if you will, as opposed to a push with the CAP. So just a little bit of a how-to out there if people are interested in that.
One thing that we've done before, and we actually have this set up in our demo room at Netsync, is when an alert is triggered, we take over a Cisco WebEx board that's in our demo room. So normally it's, you know, your video conferencing unit, your whiteboard unit. It's just your standard digital board, right? We actually end up taking over that board, and what we end up showing is a scrolling marquee at the bottom of the board. We end up showing a live security camera feed, from outside the demo room. And then we also bring up live television. So live, you know, news in the event of, you know, a massive event going on from within that room. And so we've seen customers really take to that idea of, hey, not only is it just a digital sign, but it can also show us a live television feed. It can show us a live video feed. It can, scroll a ticker down along the bottom of the screen and alert employees on what they need to be doing. So it's more than just a digital sign. It can really be customized to do whatever the customer needs it to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Obviously, it depends on the type of endpoint they're using, but it's nice to know that you've leveraged and extended an existing endpoint, in this case, a Cisco Web Export.
Right.
So how are you seeing IP speakers used? We talked about a little bit about not forgetting about the power of an existing overhead paging system, typically an analog system, that can give it some new intelligence. But where are you seeing IP speakers used?
So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but we're seeing IP speakers really being used in greenfield installations, or if a customer is, expanding a building that they currently have. That's where we see the most prevalence of an IP speaker installation going on. And for the reasons you mentioned, it's because each speaker kind of can be its own zone. It can be controlled individually. And not only are IP speakers anymore, they are also speakers with a digital sign at the bottom of them in some cases, right? Where we can show the time, we can scroll a ticker, we can flash LED lights on them, just depending on which models we go for. We also can daisy chain IP speakers together. So that cuts down on the amount of wiring and network drops you have to have, right? So that's typically where we're seeing IP speakers being placed, is in new construction. Not to say we don't have customers that don't replace analog systems with IP. We do have customers that say, hey, our analog paging system has been here for 30 years. It's no longer meeting the needs that we have. What can we do? And in that case, we like to talk to them and say, okay, if it's not meeting your needs now, what do you want it to do to meet your needs, and how can we continue to use what's there? And if we can't come up with a way to use what's there to be as cost effective as possible, then we can look at doing an IP implementation, right? And you mentioned earlier the integration between the analog and the IP, and that's completely possible. We do it all the time, where we may have some buildings that have an old analog system in, and some buildings that are brand new that have an IP system that are installed. And we can tie those together so that those alerts that are sent, or those pages that are sent, can be sent to the analog system and the IP system simultaneously, and to the end users, they don't know any difference, right? So that can absolutely be done.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when we look at IP speakers, there are a lot of different options, and I'll just stress that Singlewire publishes an annual IP speaker buyer's guide. And the reason we started doing that about 3 years ago is we have about 10 or 11 now different speaker manufacturers that are using the Informacast protocol in their IP speakers. Some of them have as many as 25 different speaker models. So when you take that many speaker vendors times that many speaker models, you get a lot of options. And we had customers coming to us saying, which one should we use, for this situation or that situation? And we wanted to try to stay neutral, but increasingly we found that to be difficult, because customers would then get frustrated and say, well, you must have some idea. I mean, you're dealing with this every day. Tell me what works best in a classroom. What are other people doing? So we started publishing this guide. We just refreshed the latest version about 2 months ago, and it's broken down by use case. So we pick a winner in each category, a category being best classroom speaker, best healthcare speaker, best two-sided speaker, like for hallway use, best outdoor speaker, that sort of thing. So if people listening are interested in understanding what might work best in their environment, I encourage you to check out that speaker buyer's guide. You can download it off the Singlewire website, and you don't need to register or anything to get it. There's no gate in front of the download. All right, so let's talk a little bit about camera systems. There are different ways to tie in this, different use cases, different reasons you might want to tie your camera system into your mass notification system and make it part of that ecosystem. What are you seeing out there today?
Yeah, absolutely. Cameras are becoming a larger piece of the mass notification solution. We are seeing that grow more and more. I kind of alluded to that example earlier of, maybe there's an area of the building that we know people shouldn't be in at a certain time of day, or if we notice a certain event, there is technology out there that can kind of, for lack of a better word, watch the video feed for certain things that may happen and recognize certain things in video feeds and trigger alerts based on that. So we are seeing that happen more and more. And people are integrating the camera solutions into mass notification based on, the criteria that they set, based on time of day, based on notified actions so that they see in the camera's feed that's out there. It like I said, kind of goes back to, what is the policy of the organization and what are they looking to do, right? Sometimes we see people that say, I have cameras inside, but I don't necessarily care about them. I'm more concerned about what is going on outside of my building, right? And if I see something happening in a certain area, maybe I want to send that alert and automatically notify public safety officials, right? So we are seeing that happen more and more, especially as the camera technology is growing and becoming smarter. We do see that occurring at a more rapid pace.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. A lot of possibilities there. What about the access control system?
So that's another possible tie-in, with the camera system. If we see an action occurring on a camera feed, we do have customers that integrate with their access control systems and can automatically lock or unlock doors depending on, what the action is, right? So, for example, if there is a fire notification that goes off, you're going to want to unlock the doors, right? So people can exit the building and get out as soon as possible. But the opposite of that is if there's maybe an active shooter in the parking lot, you're going to want to lock the doors so that they really can't get in the building as easy, right? So we do see that happening quite a bit. And like I said, if you look at that picture there with the ID badge on it, that's not only a notification device or an alerting device, right? That is also a ID badge, right? So you can physically print the employee's picture, your logo on that badge, and it's kind of an all-in-one device, right? So it can integrate with the access control system, let them open and close doors, and then also be a trigger if needed, right? So we do see this happening more and more, where the access control systems are being integrated with the mass notification systems, and then we can integrate and treat those access control systems based on what the policies are of the organization. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. That's interesting. So I have one more question for you, Chris, but before I ask you this, I want to remind people that you can ask questions, because when I'm done with this last question for Chris, we're going to take your questions and we're going to go ahead and we're going to answer those. So go ahead and punch those into your keyboard right now. The last question is, what is the benefit of integrating an organization's existing phone system? And before you answer that, Chris, let me just set this up by saying this is really how Singlewire started. It's how the InformantCast product started, and it started after the 9/11 attack, specifically after the attack on the Pentagon. There was a Homeland Security mandate that came out for all federal government agencies that said they needed to evacuate buildings in the event of an emergency. And there was a government agency that had its campus, its buildings in DC were built in the 1930s. They had no overhead paging system. They had no way of complying with this mandate. And they were looking at buying a new phone system at the time. And so the first version of InformantCast was a piece of software that sent text and audio broadcasts to 4,200 phones at once in 250 different zones for this government agency. They're still a customer today, and so the broadcasting to phones, taking those IP phones and turning them into emergency notification speakers, not calling them because that doesn't scale and people don't answer the phones in an emergency anyway, but broadcasting through them, taking control of the speakerphone and sending streaming audio, as well as if they have a display, sending text to that display. That's a hallmark of what we do. But my question to you as an integrator who's working with lots of customers is, why would someone want to do that? What's the benefit?
I think you just answered your own question, honestly. The IP phone is an IP speaker in essence of this and what we're talking about here, right? So, you don't have to think about it as, oh, I need to put an IP speaker in the ceiling, or I need to mount one to the wall. If there's a desk that has a phone, or if you got a phone mounted to the wall in the break room, that in essence is an IP speaker, right? That is a notification device. And so it speeds up the ability to alert employees and staff of an event, right? And whether that be a manual, hey, I'm going to hit a button on my phone, I'm going to record a message real quick, and the second I hang up, it's going to broadcast to every phone, or whether that be an automated trigger, right? We've detected smoke or we've detected fire, we can play an automated, automatically or pre-recorded message to every phone in the building. And flash the screen on the phone. We can display text on the phone if the phone's capable of that. It speeds up the ability to send out that notification to all of the employees that are there, whether they can hear that notification because it's an IP speaker, or they can see the screen, with the text that we display. The biggest benefit of that is you've already got an IP speaker installed, and you're speeding up the notification that's being sent out to the employees.
Right, and people have them everywhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to tie this all together, like, why would someone want an ecosystem, and how does that work in a practical scenario? So I have a slide up now speaking to this from a customer's perspective. This is a customer that they had an incident, what they thought was an active shooter incident, ended up that there was a gunshot, but it was a young man who drove to a healthcare system to their parking lot and took his own life with a gunshot. They sent out an alert, and a lot of people didn't get the alert. And so they did an after action survey, and they asked their people, how would you want to be notified next time? And the real interesting thing is people answer based on where they were at the last incident. If they were driving to campus, they said, I want to get a text message. If they were walking in between buildings, they said, I want to be notified based on that overhead paging system in the Skyway. If they're at their desk, they said, I want a desktop pop-up that interrupts what I'm doing. But you don't know where you're going to be the next time this happens. So that's why it's important to have an ecosystem, because you're going to have that speed and that reach and that intrusiveness, and that reach really comes from sending to all these communication devices. So with that, let's see if we have any questions out there.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you for sending in your questions, and thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. Really appreciate it. So we do have some questions coming in, and I will jump right in. We do have some time, so thanks everyone. Let's see. So the first question I will get into is backup power of the system. And the question is, does the system require backup power in case of a tornado, for instance? How does that work in that type of emergency situation?
Right. So great question. Yes, the system does require power to work, and as do many of the things that we're tying into, right? So it depends on the channel that you're using to notify people. So let's take a step back, and if you're sending to all the different methods available, you can send text messages and things that don't rely on the building at all, and so you wouldn't need power for that. Phone calls from the cloud, text messages from the cloud. And clearly, if the cell towers are all knocked out as well, then you'd have a different issue. But if you're talking about the things that are in building, then yeah, there is a virtual appliance or a hardware appliance that the software runs on that we use to reach the things that are inside the building, such as broadcasting to the phones, the speakers, the desktops, and so forth. And you would need to have backup power for that.
Okay, thank you. And so then I'm going to get a little bit into the actual carrying out of a mass notification event. And this question is, well, it's actually more of a setting it up, excuse me. Can you isolate the notifications to a specific location within a building or a specific floor? Or do you have to notify the entire building, campus, et cetera? So I guess the question really is, can you customize where notifications are going? Have you had either of you had any kind of experience with that? And how does that work?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I can answer that question, Pat. So, for example, my customer that I mentioned earlier, the heating and air conditioning customer of mine, they were in I think it was 10 or 11 story building, but their employees were only on like the first, second, fourth, and eighth floor, right? For example, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they were only on certain floors in the building. They didn't occupy every floor in the building. And so we completely customized to where when there was a notification that needed to be sent out, that we only notified certain floors, right? So if there was an event happening on one floor, only that floor got notified. Or if it was, say, a fire in the building, for example, we wanted to notify all of the floors that their employees were on. So it's completely customizable, just based on whichever your needs are. And so that's a good example of, doing it on a floor-based example. We can also do it based on campus level, right? So maybe you're a large university and you have multiple buildings, but you don't need to notify every single building. If there's something happening in the library, maybe the chemistry building doesn't really care about that, right? So that is completely customizable just based on whatever the needs of the customer are.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm going to drill down just a little bit more with an additional question we got from another attendee. And that question is, as far as equipment, the actual equipment when notifications are coming through. And so that question is, how will the notification come through on a phone if that phone is in use? The example specifically is as in a boardroom being used for a meeting. So I'm picturing a phone on a conference table, that kind of thing. So what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and the answer is it depends on the phone system that we're working with. We started out working with Cisco systems phones, and with Cisco you have the ability, that's a configurable setting on a per message basis. So you can have it skip a phone in use, or you could have it barge in even if the phone is in use. So it depends on what your preference is.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have time for about one more question and any closing comments from you gentlemen. So let's see, that last question I'll ask is, circling back to the pandemic situation at the moment that we're all in, what are you seeing as the biggest challenge for organizations in their sharing emergency communications in the midst of the pandemic? What kind of maybe lessons learned have you seen, or commonalities, and how are people addressing that out there?
Yeah, so I'll take a swing at that, and then Chris, if you want to try as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
What we're seeing is that everyone's life is disrupted, right? So if you were a carpeted office environment where people came to work from 8 till 5, let's say, now you have people that are working off shift, and largely because childcare arrangements are disrupted. So you don't know what your people are doing at any given point in time during the day, and so reaching them on a lot of different methods is more important than ever, and also breaking through the clutter, because there are different notification methods out there. So if you have a way that you can get in touch with people, we have a healthcare system that was sending out a message once per quarter. They're now sending out a message 7 times a day because they're using InformantCast as the primary method of interrupting people for important notifications and keeping them up to date on what's happening with the pandemic. That's an extreme example, but that's the sort of thing that we're seeing.
Thank you.
Sure, and one thing I can add on to that is, what we're seeing now is employees that are dispersed, right? Like, as Pat said, we don't have people going into offices anymore. We have people working from home for various reasons. Now, I work from home 99% of the time anyway, even prior to having COVID. I have a Cisco IP phone sitting on my desk here at home, and I can receive notifications on it. I receive notifications on my iPhone with the Singlewire mobile app. I can receive notifications on my desktop or my laptop here with the Singlewire application on my PC. So, there are multiple ways to reach out and send those to receive those notifications. And so we do see customers having a concern of, hey, I don't have people in a centralized location anymore. How can I still notify them of things that I need to notify them of? And, those are just a couple examples of how that can be done, right? So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Looks like we're about to wrap up and out of time. So I just want to thank you both again for the presentation and for this information. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you to Singlewire Software for sponsoring the webinar and our attendees as well. A recording of this webinar will be available online shortly at facilityexecutive.com, also on the Singlewire website, and that's singlewire.com. So thank you, and again, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.